Excellent. All right, everybody. Well, welcome. I think people are starting to show up a little bit. If you have any technical issues, please let us know. As like everybody, we're all figuring this out. So hopefully you've had some time to interact. If you've been to our presentation before or a version of it, we do some polling software. So I want to put that in place to make sure that everybody is logged in and see what that looks like. So I'm going to do that right now. We would think that we would be so well versed at this by now, but not quite yet. Alrighty, so we are getting started with the mental health questions, and so our first way to kind of figure that out is to get a gauge of where everybody is today, and there's obviously so much going on in the world, and the start of Vaut Equal is exciting, and we're sad to not be together, but inspired to be with each other. And some of these topics make us feel even more exhausted. So take the time. There's two different ways you can do it. You can go to pollev.com/Beckham, and that will show you what the slide looks like. Let me see if I can pull that. I'm going back and forth between all of these things. So there we go. Content. Good. Here we go. So join in once you've logged in the first time, or if you're on that URL as we go through the slides. You only have to kind of log in once. So if texting is easier, text my name, Ash Beckham, B-E-C Ash, A-S-H-B-E-C-K-H-A-M, all one word, to 22333. And once you've joined, you'll get a response via text, and then you'll be able to participate throughout. We will compile the results of all of this polling and put it in with our shared documents by the end of the week. So we encourage that. It's completely anonymous, and we use this to get a gauge as who's in the room, or virtual room, I guess. If I could remind everybody to mute their microphones just to make sure that that's what's happening. And then throughout, when we get to the Q&A sessions, we encourage you to either use the polls component of the Pathable platform, that tab to enter your questions, or we'd love to interact. So you can unmute and show your video if you want to ask any of us questions. So we're really, really excited to have everybody there. We'll let this thing kind of keep rolling, and we'll move forward as we go. I'm super excited to be with this panel again. Two old friends and one new friend. We've done this a few different times, and like everybody, we've pivoted to address the new environment, right? This new normal is going to be a marathon and not a sprint, and so we as leaders take it on as our responsibility to adapt to and be nimble enough to adapt to the current environment, both as leaders within our own organizations, and then also within our ERGs and BRGs. And so I am excited to welcome everybody to back to the panel again. We're going back to Will's piece. And so I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves, give us one word on how they're feeling today. And then we'll move into the greater discussion. So we've got Wil Lewis from Bank of America is gonna kick off our introductions. Will?
Hey, thank you so much, Ash. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me and my fellow panelists again. I'm Wil Lewis with Bank of America. I am a part of the diversity and inclusion team here. And one of the things that we at Bank of America have really been doing is focused on how do we drive engagement of our teammates around the world, as we've all been working in different formats and different styles over the past 6 months plus, and also trying to work through the things that have been happening externally in the outside world, what that means to us and what toll emotionally is taking on us as well. So I'm thrilled and looking forward to having a discussion around that today.
Awesome, great, thanks, Will. And Kevin Bleyle with Procter & Gamble.
Am I coming through? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Kevin Bleyle with Procter & Gamble for the last 22 years, and I've been doing work in the LGBTQ plus space for the last, call it 15. Most recently, leading our global LGBTQ plus group called GABLE. I'm based in Boston, and I just, as of last Thursday, took over supply chain management for our Art Shaving group and our North America grooming direct-to-consumer business. So learning a lot about the direct-to-consumer business, which is also very virtual, So all different parts of my role colliding into one. So like Will, very excited to do this in yet a third different iteration. We did two in person, and this will be our third that will be slightly different. So thanks everybody for joining.
Excellent, thanks Kevin. And Mark Dunaway with Boeing, welcome to the party.
Thank you. I'm the new kid on the block, so it's great to be here. I've really looked forward to this. I've been with Boeing for over 36 years. I am a senior quality manager on the defense side on what's called strategic deterrent systems. But more importantly, I am the Boeing Enterprise Company focal outreach to OSTEM, and I am the site sponsor for our Boeing Employees Pride Alliance, or BEPA, which is our BRG at the site in Heath, Ohio. I'm located in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm really looking forward to getting this panel going.
Excellent, right on. All right, well, we will move through, and again, we're back to the polling software. So for those of you, this gives us a good visual of what we've got, how everybody's feeling, a lot of excited, some other things happening there. But to get a feeling of who's here, how many of your ERG members are currently remote? So many of us are in different industries, right? So depending on job descriptions, industries, individual locations, this varies to a certain extent, right? And so this has been this unexpected occurrence we've had to adapt to, but individually organizations and industries are going back, and sometimes people, people weren't able to work from home. There's certain jobs where they're not able to do that. And the impetus of this group in the beginning was taking kind of the unique perspectives, but shared challenges that Boeing, Procter & Gamble, and Bank of America all face in that ability to take kind of the great parts of ERG and BRG engagement at their headquarters and take that out. And now that we're working, so many of us are working remotely, those challenges have been amplified because that engagement just isn't for something as ERGs, our need, especially around mental health, to be able to engage in a way and have that connection, and to know that isolation that we feel sometimes at remote locations is something that is experienced by so many of our employees now. So you can see where we land. Just simple math, we're talking in the 90% are at most or all, right? So this is a whole different landscape for us to deal with and adjust to real time when ERGs and BRGs are as important as ever. So now, when do we expect people to come back, right? So we know 90% of our ERG, BRG members are remote, and now when do we expect to have to make yet another transition back to the way that it was, but probably not exactly the way that it was, because this isn't something that's really ever going to go away, right? And that there's some opportunities and best practices that we've learned from this environment that we will want to carry forward. So looks like we're talking, 9 months to a year out for most of us, certainly through the end of the year for the vast majority of us. So now that we kind of know what those numbers are, we'll get into the discussion a little bit more specifically. So these are the topics that we're going to go to. What are the impact of virtual meetings on mental health? And then how do we as leaders really ingrain mental health and mental health awareness and mental wellness into the design of what our virtual offerings are? How are we made aware of that? How do our resources and support systems that exist, how do we as ERG, BRG members really, and specifically as leaders, how do we make sure that those support surfaces evolve as needed in current environment? Then we'll look how to make those remote connections work for you. We all face unique challenges, whether that's for an individual member, for an industry, for a segment of our workforce. How do we have those workarounds, knowing that sense of inclusion, that sense of belonging that is so fundamental in our ERG, BRG networks is, again, accessible to everybody, right? We know how to navigate that in person, but how do we navigate that online and face those challenges and create those workarounds to make sure we have inclusivity, to make sure everybody feels part of what we're trying to accomplish. And then thirdly, what does returning to our new norm look like? How do we take some of these creative opportunities and creative solutions we've come up with and make sure we're maintaining that across? You know, some people have had increased engagement because accessibility has become so much easier. How does that continue through forward? How do we take these best practices of having to learn on our feet and really adapt and make sure that those are long-standing changes that we're able to make within our organization? So we're gonna start with Wil and virtual meetings, but first we're gonna kick off with a few more poll questions just to make sure we know kind of what people's experience is relative to creating those virtual meetings. So prior to the shutdown, have you ever planned a virtual event? And by event, we mean, you know, virtual meeting, virtual interaction. This could be either a ERG, BRG event, or you know, something as simple as the monthly meeting that we have, right? And we all know, we've been in enough Zoom meetings and virtual events to know what a bad one feels like, right? That just doesn't engage us, that we're checking our email or doing something else during it. So how do we as leaders create these environments where we're able to create truly engaging events? So, you know, 60-40 about for people that have or have not. As we go to the next one, you consider yourself an expert. So are you really able to leverage all the tools that you need to be able to make these impactful, right? Or is there always room to grow? And if you consider yourself in that, you know, 12, 13% that are experts, are you really leveraging that for your other BRGs? If you find yourself to be an expert, how are we connecting with other BRGs to make sure your best practices are something that other people are using? And then our last one is, has it been successful? I think that's a matter of defining those metrics, right? Just having the event, sometimes that's a success. But as we continue, and this isn't just a Band-Aid to get us through a couple months, but really something that's critical for us to think about moving forward. Has it been successful? What do those success markers mean to you? And then finally, how can we make them even more successful, right? Once we've had a successful event, we're looking at increased engagement? Are we looking at, again, integrating mental health into the design, right? What does successful mean to you, and how do we expand upon that success and broaden that success moving forward? So I'm going to kick it over to Wil as we go through those oh, sorry, wrong ones, impact of virtual meetings. So take it away, Wil.
Yep, thanks so much, Ash, and appreciate your taking us through those poll questions. What was really interesting to me is where we started out when we did the first word cloud, that, you know, there were a lot of people feeling excited and engaged, and I'm really thrilled about that on day one of Summit. But there's still some folks that are feeling anxious, kind of blah or or some of the words that I also saw pop up on the screen there as well as a part of it. And what was really notable is about half of our people, half of our participants here on the call have done a virtual event. Many have, that means half have not. But a lot, the majority, felt as if their virtual event they did for the first time was successful. That's where I want to start, folks. Let's talk a little bit about what successful means. You know, not only are each of us dealing with all the things that are happening and going on right now, there are a couple of critical things that are occurring right now for our teammates, for the people that are members of our ERGs as well as a part of that. And that's what I want to talk about. Let's just think about where you were in February as opposed to where you were in April, to where you were in June, and where you are today on this journey of this world that we're all trying to navigate right now. So not only for many of the people, according to the poll that Ash put up a little while ago, not only are many of us now working from home, when we're accustomed to having those interactions in the office place, when you're doing that, you're kind of in a sense of isolation. And for LGBT plus populations, what that really means for us, it hits us in a very different way than it does for the broader population, because sometimes we're living by ourselves, or we don't necessarily have a family that lives in the house with us, in a larger proportion than it does of society that's not LGBT plus, which means some of those feelings of disconnectedness, some of those feelings of lack of engagement can really begin to permeate into how people engage with the ERGs. Maybe some of your members begin to withdraw upon that. One of the things that we're going to talk about and spend some time on later on, Mark will cover for us, is the do's and don'ts and how do you engage really tactically with it. What I want to talk to you about right now is the emotions of it all, right? So when you're doing your event and you're conducting it and you're sharing with your teammates, whatever the content is that you're sharing as a part of your ERG get together, what are you doing to actually have them feel like they are a part of it? One of the things that we're doing here today are the polls, right? So as a part of the polls, you can become an active participant. You're not just on the other end receiving some one-way information around what to do. That's something that you could really be thinking about as you're driving your engagements as well. I think one of the other things that really, and I'm gonna really hopefully give you 3 specific things that you can use. Polls to really help drive engagement is one of them. The second thing, and I think my co-panelists may have some thoughts here in a moment as well, the second thing that I really ask you to think about is, do the same old topics work, right? So you have some things that you've been doing with your ERGs for the past many years, and in some cases you think it's a tradition. We've always done it. We're just gonna do it again this year. We're just gonna make it virtual. We're gonna do everything the same, except it'll be on Zoom. The question that I challenge you to step back and say, particularly as I saw a lot of folks aren't going back in the office until sometime middle of next year, is that the most impactful way? What do you want that audience to walk away from with? And then what are the barriers to actually having them walk away with that message, whatever it is you're trying to deliver? So start by, first of all, just thinking about the impact you're trying to make. What are you trying to have your audience walk away from the meeting with? And then what's standing in the way? What do you need to clear the path up? And maybe one of the things that's standing in the way is them not multitasking while on your meeting, right? So how do you stop them from multitasking while on your meeting? Ask questions that are engaging. Provide them exactly what they're telling you they need, as opposed to what you think they need. Maybe it's a pre-poll a week before your event or 2 weeks before your event, where you can find out what your audience really wants to learn and hear about. And even though it may be difficult for us to depart from what we've done for the past 3, 4, 5 years, or however long it's been, maybe right now in this time, that's not what your audience wants. So the second nugget that I hope to share is consider doing a pre-poll. So we talked about polling during the event to try and drive engagement and be sure people aren't multitasking. The second way to help drive engagement, hopefully from an emotional standpoint and a wellness standpoint, is pre-poll. You know, ask folks what do they want and then deliver it to them. And then the third thing that I'll give here before I open it up to some of my panelists to weigh in as well, the third thing I was just thinking about is, even though many of you lead your LGBT plus ERGs for your organizations, you know, the audience it has a lot of other intersections that come with it, right? Whether you are Black, whether you are Latina, whether you are from the Middle East, whether you you know, are battling depression, whether you have other wellness things, whether you are a caregiver for a parent or a loved one that's ill and you're trying to work through that, or your children that you have that you're caring for as well. So as you're going into this, one of the things as an ERG you can think about is, gosh, outside of programming that we most often do, how are these pandemics, because there's more than one pandemic happening right now, how are these pandemics impacting my audience, the people that I'm listening to? And do I need to really think about adjusting the content, what I'm delivering to them, to be able to address that? So the third thing, remember I said I was going to give you 3, we've talked about 2 so far. The third thing that I will offer up to you is adjust your programming that thinks about the intersection, that considers the intersectionality of your audience and the external factors that may be affecting them, that may be affecting your audience. For example, if your audience is up in the Northwest and there have been riots on the streets every day for months, that's taking a toll. In addition to the fact that they're at home and they're trying to work and they're caring for the people that they love. They may be battling their own health issues and having to stay even more separate than they would because they have their own ailments that they just can't risk possibly getting COVID as a part of it. And then every day they turn on the news and they see they see things that are people that are peacefully protesting on the streets. They see some things that they may perceive as items that are upsetting on the streets. And all of that's being taken in and impacting folks in a different way. So think about that as you think about your programming and how you need to adjust. Now, I know Kevin, Mark, Ash, you guys have all gone through some things like this as well. I'd welcome your nuggets and pearls of wisdom as a part of this as well.
So one thing I was going to add, Will, to build off, I know often the BRGs or the ERGs have a relatively limited budget when it comes to planning events, when it comes to having speakers. One of the side benefits of being remote is that there's actually a way to bring in not just at a lower cost, but a more diverse group of speakers to have different events, because you're able to spread those dollars over, not just travel costs, but actually, having the speakers come in. So that's one thing, building off of what Will was saying about, how can you think differently? How can you turn this into a positive as much as possible? But it's thinking about how you spend that money, that limited amount of funds that you have. And then the other one we've found is that it's easier to have small events when they're remote, and have them very targeted. So like Will was saying, very targeted at specific topics, be it specifically for your LGBT group, or be it something that's intersectional. We've had the problem in the past, each one of our ERGs have their event, and it's their one time per year that they get everybody together. And so they really want to stay focused on their specific ERG. But if you've got multiple smaller events that you can do virtually and record them if people need to, can't actually participate during the time, it just gives you the ability to take that impact of your speakers, your training, your topics, and spread it out over a lot more different impact to your constituents.
Yeah, that's a really good one, Kevin. And let me add on, because I think what you said dovetails really nicely into some of the comments I'm seeing in the chat box as well. One of the things that folks are asking is really, how do you drive that engagement? That's something that we all are probably missing is the water cooler conversation for those folks that are working from home. That engagement when you're walking down the hallway, when you're coming through the turnstile in your building, or however you get into your building in the morning. And something that I picked up from an intern of mine many years ago is at the top of our meetings. We still do it today in our meetings. We have a period where there's brownies and frownies is what we call it. And so brownies is something good that's happened. Frownies is something that's not so good, because what it does is it opens the door to that we're all human. There's not just this perpetual flush of fantastic things that are happening all day, every day. And what's really important about brownies and frownies is it's not just about work. It's really an open window for anyone to share anything they feel comfortable with sharing. And so in many of my meetings, we open up the meeting and we put into the agenda some time for brownies and frownies at the top of the meeting. And it's amazing how it doesn't take the place 100% of that water cooler chat. What it really does is it helps drive some organic connection that we are all missing out on, frankly, from not being in the office.
That's exactly what I was going to talk about, is in order to have the connection with people is to allow time at the beginning of a meeting to discuss, or at least talk about, what is impacting your mental health. And you don't necessarily have to ask it that way, but just showing compassion and care. You mentioned the riots and street demonstrations up in the Northwest. Well, there's also the fires in Southern California. There are all of the hurricanes and storms in the deep South, where my family is from. And so we all have our worries, and being able to have the opportunity, even if it's just the first 5 minutes of a meeting, to say, what's really worrying you outside of work, to just acknowledge it. It builds that connection and really helps impact people to make them realize you're not alone. We're always able to share things like that. And that helps get people in a better mental state, or better mental position to go into the meeting engaged.
And I think that a critical part of that, whether these are in our BRG or ERG interactions or just our regular meetings, I mean, I think that's the brilliance of what this does is it explains to us not only other virtual meetings, but specifically our ERG, BRG events, is that consistency, is that mental health check-in and awareness consistently. Because when you see someone, whether your one-on-one or your group meetings are weekly or monthly, when you're consistently asking that question, are people readily are engaging in that, then as a leader or just even as a peer, you can see what changes have existed, right? Are the concerns and worries and stresses on that person expanding, contracting, shifting, and then how are we able to leverage the resources that we have to be able to reach out? When we give people opportunities, they might not engage in that vulnerable way the first time, or the second time, or the third time, but when they see the people that are in that organization or within that group start to show those vulnerabilities, then it becomes more open and more contained, and then we can kind of address those issues as they come up. And to be able to see that consistency over time really gives us that lens into somebody else's experience and allows us to see when we have challenges that we need to deal with. So anybody else have anything to add just on this? I know it's gonna
turn this
love
lady
you
off.
in. Also, just to remind everybody to mute your microphones, especially if you're
Yeah, I am.
joining.
Yes.
No worries.
Do you need something from me?
No. If you could just mute it, you'd be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he's opposite muting.
Hi, Dennis. We can hear you.
Oh, there we go. I think we're back.
Maybe one last thing to build on it, that people love the brownies and frownies thing, because I was watching the chat, because it's fun and sort of funny, but then someone else had the sharing, but share the singer sharing, which would probably be really good for either a LGBTQ plus or LGBTQ plus friendly meeting. You also want to make sure you know your audience. Just like I don't like it when people use sports analogies in work meetings, because I care less about sports ball. We got to make sure that we don't exclude our non-share loving friends.
Exactly. And I know we're going to move on to the next item. I'll close the segment with one thing. So we shared 3 really tactical and tangible things, and then we got about another 3 or 4 bonus items on there we hope that you all can take away. Here's one other thing. Check in before you have your ERG events. Check in with your HR department. Understand what type of mental wellness benefits are available to your company teammates. And maybe HR has a 1-pager on what those are. As a standard, at the end of every meeting, just share it with everyone. Everyone that joined, share with everyone. Hey, just in case you didn't know, here are some wellness things that our company offers. It becomes a point of connectivity that folks may not have had previously. So Ash, thanks for the opportunity to kind of talk through
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Well, I love that. So I know that Bank of America has a segment and a division that deals with that. But I think it's also important to know, just like you said, that we have to be well versed in that. Even if we think that those are challenges that we as a leader are not facing, we have to be comfortable sharing that information to really do the work to be aware of the kind of peaks and valleys of our own mental wellness and mental wellness and health, to really be able to share in a trusted way what those resources are and exist, and not knowing simply that they exist at the organization isn't as critical as knowing what it's like to actually go through that process, right? If somebody's going to come to me and say, well, do I email somebody, or is that like an in-person Zoom call? Like how vulnerable do I need to be? We really need to know what that process looks like for our teammates and our team members to be able to share that. So I guess I would assume that an extension of what you were saying was to really go through the process of connecting with those resources ourselves and have them at the ready. It's not hey, I'll give you that in an email later this week. It's here on my regular shared documents that I can get out to you immediately, because sometimes that moment of somebody reaching out is the exact time that they need it. And I also like just the normalization of sharing that at the end of every meeting. Again, that constant seeing it. It's not going to be the first time, it might be the 10th time, but to get somebody to engage in that way, you have to be willing to dive in like that. So thanks so much for that perspective. Alrighty, team, we are going to go back to the next set of polls. So this is going to be Mark's perspective. Again, they have so many different work groups that they work with, and ability and access to technology, as just an example, is something that they're dealing with regularly. So we're just going to go to another poll real quick and see where everybody lands on that. Oh, whoops, I messed it up. There we go. What is the top challenge with engagement with the remote group? I think I had advanced it a slide ahead, so everybody had already expanded. So what is our top challenge? And I saw a question in the chat that we'll bring up later around time commitments, but it looks like we're pretty much split somewhat evenly between time, and that is how do we find a common time when we're all over the place. We have too many meetings, too many things going on to actually engage, that it's actually a lot easier if it's in person for some of us to put a meeting into our schedule as opposed to something externally. And then participation, how do we get the numbers that we want and really maintain that engagement with our BRG, ERG numbers when sometimes that stuff falls down on our priority list. So I'm gonna stop sharing and go to you, Mark, and get you started. Have you get us started on what Boeing is doing to address some unique circumstances that maybe other people haven't thought of, but inevitably have people in the organization are facing. So take it away, Mark.
All right, thank you. When we talk about unique challenges of remote connections, it's really how do you make the connections work for you and for your team? Well, I'll start out we're pretty all familiar with what I'm about to talk about, but these are really quick things in preparation for meetings that we all need to be aware of, whether we're leading a meeting or participating in one. And that is, make sure you have access and the tools that you need to participate. Make sure your computer's working, your camera's working, your headset's on, you know the location, you've got your name in there, everything's already set up. Make sure you log into the meeting early so that you can validate that your connection works. How many times have we gotten into a meeting late only to find out that it wasn't working right, or that you couldn't get in, or they couldn't hear you? I've run into that numerous times. Make sure if you have, like on Zoom, you have a system profile, or as we had to set up one here for Out and Equal, make sure it includes not only your official name and your photo, but your pronouns and the names that you want to be called. Because if you're like a friend of mine who goes by his middle name, but his official name's his first name, which he hates, everything shows up, and if people don't know him, they're always calling him by his first name. So put in the name you want to be called. Make sure you understand how to engage with the system, how to mute and unmute, how to turn your camera on and off, all that kind of stuff. If you're able to set backgrounds, as I see a number of you are, I'm not at my home, but if you are, make sure that you have an appropriate background set up and ready to go. Make sure you're knowing how to work the chat, how to ask live questions, all of that type of stuff. So while you're in a meeting, and this is one of the things that I've run into a number of times when you get into meetings, especially in the environment we're in today, where we're all virtual and our calendars have 4 conflicting meetings and we're trying to multitask, and you're listening to one meeting on one computer and you're participating in another one, and oh, by the way, you've got an IM over here and email. We've all run into that. Try to make sure that you know the topic of the meeting, know who's going to be leading it, know what the format is, and minimize distractions. Some of you may have heard a dog barking in the background. That's my dog, one of my 2, who happens to be mouthy. I had to put them outside before this got started because I needed to be able to minimize those distractions. Otherwise, that 80-pound golden retriever would try to be sitting in my lap right now. So make sure that you turn off text, that you to have your dogs and cats out of the way, that you have your children out of the way if you can do that. Here's the most difficult thing I found: don't multitask. I know that's incredibly difficult in our environment, but in order to be in a meeting, all of us need to be engaged, particularly if we're the ones that are leading that meeting. Write down what questions you may have on the topic. When you realize you know what the topic is ahead of the meeting, write them down, be ready to ask them. Ask them not just to the person leading the group, but if you are leading the group, also ask them to the team members. The polling up front is great, but as you're going through a meeting, you come up with questions, be ready to ask them. I see a lot of people have been doing that here in the chat. That's great. Engaging through chat and through other meeting participants, it's awesome. It gives a way for connection. But outside of meetings, that's logistic. What do we do to keep our mental health and keep our connections with our ERG, BRG members remotely outside of meetings. How do we do that? One of the things that we are doing at Heath, Ohio, the location where I am for Boeing, is we reach out to our LGBTQ employees and our allies just to find out, hey, how you doing today? We use instant message a lot, and it's amazing how good it makes you feel when you're buried in the middle of work and you see another instant message pop up, but it's one of your ERG friends saying, hey, just checking in on you. I hope you're having a good day. I hope you're feeling well. That really makes you feel engaged again. It makes you feel connected. Also, if we can provide a virtual safe space, provide that to our BRG, ERG, LGBTQ, and allies at work and say, hey, I'm here to listen. Serve as a mentor. Serve as a sounding board. Help each other talk through those feelings of isolation, because we do way too much of work-related stuff and too little of the human-related connections in this virtual environment. I've been working from home now for over 6 months, and it's really, really very helpful to be able to have those reach out connections. So I talked earlier in my introduction about the Boeing Employee Pride Alliance. That's our business resource group for LGBTQ plus employees. So there's a number of things that we've been doing to help drive mental wellness and help show how our BRGs, our resource groups, play an impact to create connections. Through a virtual connectivity program, one is through remote and virtual attendance at conferences like this one, like Out and Equal and OSTEM that's coming up in November. We're a strong supporter of what we call external technical affiliations. So we have groups that go and connect that way. During Pride Month in June, we had a whole month calendar of little events. Kevin was talking about doing small events. We had little events planned every week, and they were specific to different topics, which brought people in and brought interest. We've been sharing our stories on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, but more importantly, within our company, Boeing has what they call the Boeing News Now, which is a daily newsletter that goes out to the entire company worldwide. And we've been sharing LGBTQ stories in that as well. One of the key things that we've been doing is partnering with our benefits program, what's called Boeing Total Rewards, to drive LGBTQ anti-discrimination and strengthen specific policies and specific benefits and programs for our LGBTQ employees. Since COVID, since this year, we've put out a resources document identifying LGBTQ providers specializing in healthcare, behavioral health, specialty care, and counseling. We've been hosting small group discussions, as I mentioned a little earlier, but we've also been hosting them tied to our employee assistance program providers. Those providers, professionals who help us with mental health issues, with behavioral health issues. We've been working with them to host webinars, and most of those have been around mental health, emotional support for the LGBTQ community and our allies during these challenging times. We've also held a recent one on financial engines to help planning for our LGBTQ community. We're also, and this will be the last thing that I will say before I open it up to questions, is we have been partnering with our primary insurance providers that provide for Boeing employees, utilizing the gender affirmation team, gender spectrum resources. We work with Trans Kids, Purple Rainbow Foundation, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. We've been tied in also with the GLBT National Hotline for peer support for local resources of all ages. So those are the things that we've been doing, and those are the things I can recommend. Two key things: be prepared for your meetings and be focused on them when you're there. And two, outside of meetings, don't forget to reach out to your fellow LGBTQ employees, BRG members, and just make connection and say, hey, I'm here. How are you doing?
That's
Thank
so
you.
great, Mark. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that were happening in the chat. Somebody just underscored in that reach out that it's critical not just to reach out and check in on somebody when you need something from them, but to make that specific reach out about nothing other than reaching out, right? And just to be able to connect in that way. I think was Jessica Drake, I think said that, which was brilliant. And then I also wanted to, there's a lot of resources that are being shared in the chat for people to see opportunities and ways to engage in different ways. One of the things that was brought up that I wanted you to address, and then maybe Will and Kevin can jump in too. If our ERG, BRG hasn't overtly had conversations about mental health resources or mental health check-ins or wellness check-ins, it can seem kind of abrupt to start to bring that up, right? To all of a sudden insert that, especially when there are the taboos around mental health. How does one begin to incorporate that? If like many of us, we're in the point of already being in ERGs and BRGs, and how do we kind of seamlessly put that into the design of what our meetings look like and kind of address the hesitancy to that? Would you have any suggestions on a good way to incorporate that kind of the first time and then start a new precedent?
Yes, and it came from one of the comments in the chat I just read. If you're in a leadership position or you're in your BRG, be vulnerable. One of the ways that I would incorporate that in is I would talk to people in the meeting during that brownies and frownies or that early start of the meeting and say, you know, I've been having some real issues with just feeling so isolated that all I do is sit in front of my computer at home and work. So I reached out to the Boeing Employee Assistance Program. I reached out and connected to resources that could help. And here's what I got from that. What do you guys think about that? How many of you have reached out? Have any of you thought about it? Because it opens up a conversation person to person. That's not, hey, here's a slide and here are the resources, help yourself to the resources. It's more about, I'm feeling vulnerable. I know they're out there. I'm taking advantage of them. How about you? Can I help?
Another idea. So whenever I talk about LGBTQ plus topics to anybody at P&G or outside of P&G, I say so many of the things that we talk about are applicable across every affinity group, every ERG, every discussion. And so when we think about this mental health space, there's a role for allies to play. You know, and I will tend to, I am not myself transgender, but in talking with many, many people who are transgender and hearing their stories and hearing what they've gone through, and I always ask ahead of time that I'm allowed to tell their stories, I then use my platform and the role I'm in to tell their story. So being able to listen to things that are happening with people from a mental health standpoint and talk about it openly and show that it's okay to talk about it. So either if it's happened to you individually or talk about a story. So, you know, I talk about my husband suffers from depression and anxiety, which actually caused him to have alcohol issues. That never gets talked about at work. And so I make sure that when I get an opportunity, whenever that opportunity is, that's my role as an ally. It just happens to be a different way of using that term ally. I make sure that I tell that story, and it is amazing the number of people who then afterward come up to me and say, oh yeah, my spouse, my brother, my parent, my child is also suffering with drug abuse, alcohol abuse, blah, blah, blah. And it opens up a conversation that wouldn't have happened, you know, if I hadn't put, and it's not even putting myself out there. It's not my story. I'm able to tell it because my husband's fine with that, but it just opens up the door to the discussion.
Kevin, I follow along with that as well because my husband suffers from bipolar and ADHD. And not only does he allow me to share that story to make that connection, but I also share the story of my personal journey because we've been together for 18 years, and how I've learned to deal with that, and how I have to learn to take a step back and not get frustrated when he forgets to do something or swears I never told him to do something when I told him 4 times, you know, that type of thing. Being able to share those stories humanizes each of us and makes those connections among all of us.
Yep.
And I think when we do that as leaders, the critical part of that is, this is a part of my life. I'm this multifaceted, multidimensional person. Does it affect me in ways? Absolutely. Does it compromise who I am at work? No, but that empathetic part of somebody's lack of engagement or depression or the way that they're affected, you know, it's that idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt. And when we start to share that this is something that happens to me too, and it's impactful, and still I am who I am at work, I think, like you said, Mark, that humanization is so critical to be able to effectively engage with peers and give people that ability to open up and to be vulnerable. Will, I'm sure you have some input on what that looks like, and that idea of sharing stories within the workplace and encouraging that within the ERG, BRG space.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ash. I think the key is creating a safe space, right? And so by creating that safe, and part of what Mark and Ash and Kevin are talking about is by sharing part of their lives, it's one part of the effort of creating that safe space where folks know that they have a place to go to. And this is what's key, right? It's again, that multi-dimension, the multifaceted part of you that Ash was just referring to, that comes into broader than just LGBT plus, right? That's certainly a part, but it's all those other parts that go in as well, because in addition to the things that were taking a toll on our wellness 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago, now you have the stuff that's happening in the world now. And sadly, time is not on our side right now, meaning in North America, we're heading into the winter months, right? When things like anxiety and depression really tend to kick up more. The days become a bit shorter for many folks, depending on exactly where you live. All of that plays a toll on someone's wellness while COVID is still going on, while we're still distancing ourselves from individuals. And so the ERGs really become a source to not only create a safe space for folks to engage, but again, I encourage you to think about providing people resources or ways to connect or opportunities to connect. That doesn't mean that every meeting is a happy hour, right? But what it does mean is that between your everyday interactions, whether it's with your ERG or with your day job that you do at your company, that you're finding ways to integrate wellness resources into that to really ensure that you're driving and having an impact as well.
And one thing I will add, and then I'll get off the stage, is we talk about safe space. We talk about being compassionate and being vulnerable. But we also have to be sincere when we listen to others, because it is not going to go anywhere if I'm vulnerable and I'm compassionate and I'm talking about my issues, and the minute someone else starts to connect and talk to me, I pick up my phone and go, oh yeah, okay, whatever. That doesn't work. You have to be in the moment and be sincerely willing to listen.
That's great, Mark. Thanks so much. All right, Kevin, we're gonna go to you. Let me just get this poll up and we will keep moving. All righty. So the last one is, our last poll is, what aspects of remote events / meetings do you want to keep going forward? So inevitably, as we've had to be creative, there are certain things that we've maybe benefited from, whether that's an understanding of what it means to be a remote employee, what our remote coworkers have been going through, people that have always worked from home. Now we kind of know what that looks like and feels like, and kind of pull the curtains on that a little bit. There are things that we're getting from it. So, and how do we keep that momentum going? How do we keep that, if we figured out a new way to create a virtual safe space, and that's spoken to so many of our peers, how do we continue to have that accessibility and that way to connect virtually if for some reason that feels safer to people, right? So what do we have these things that we want to continue forward? So it looks like we're kind of evenly split through through all of these, and Kevin's going to address them from a P&G perspective, and then kind of a broader overall perspective. So Kevin, I'm going to shoot it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ash. So I never really know where the saying came from, but this too shall pass. And so we've talked a lot about how to compensate or how to get through all of this craziness that we're living in right now. But fingers crossed on multiple fronts, we will get to the other side of this. And what we don't want to do is lose some of what we've learned about this remote connection. And I'll tie it back right when we started. Somebody asked the question, I think our first poll was, how many of your employees are working remote? And someone said, by remote, do you mean they were already working there, or they have now had to go virtual because of COVID? And that's exactly what I want to talk about, which is we're going to go back to what people have started calling as the new normal. The new normal may never be exactly what we had before. So at P&G in North America, every October, we had an all-day conference where 600 or 700 people flew in from around the continent for an all-day event. We may never go fully back to something like that, but if we do, or when we start to go toward that, what are we going to do to make sure everything we've learned over the last 6 months right now, but at that point, maybe a year? And just a few pointers in our last few minutes here. Learn now. So think about, what are those things that you're doing differently? What are those unique things you're doing to make sure that everybody can stay connected, everybody can participate, that you can make sure that you continue into the future? Remember them, write them down, note them, so that when it goes back to the new norm, you don't all of a sudden forget all those and you've lost all of the good things that have come out of this craziness. The second one is be intentional. I think investing in the technology that's needed to facilitate remote access. We talked it a little bit as a panel, where different people, depending on their role descriptions, depending on their jobs, depending on their location, might not have as much access to the technology. So how can you make sure that any investments you're doing today to make sure that they do have access continue when we get to our new normal? And then plan ahead. I know we've always struggled with this. When the majority of the people were going to be in person for a meeting, we never thought as much about that handful of people that weren't going to be in person. And you almost forgot about them. I mean, how many people were on a call, where 10 people were in the room and you were the 1 or 2 people on the phone? Nobody ever asked you your opinion. Nobody listened. They didn't even hear you when you tried to interject. And often they'd hang up the phone when they were done and just walk out of the room. Like no one would, so how do you make sure that you've planned ahead to have, even if you're going to have an in-person event, that you still have a way for people to join remotely, or at the very least that you record it so that people can go back later? And a couple of people were talking about, how do you keep people engaged, or how do you balance workload with events? A great way to balance an event that allows the most people to actually get the most out of it is have a recording so they can go and follow up and watch it or listen to it later. That is something that we need to make sure that we don't lose, especially if you're in a global organization like ours. And then to even think about things like making sure that it has closed captioning, making sure that it has translations into the predominant languages that you have as a company. So how do you really make those changes now and make them stick, so that when we get to that new normal, you've got all the benefits that you've built up over this year or so?
That's great, Kevin. Can you just like some maybe implementation of that? I know you had posted in the chat about kind of that first touch point for mental health and having some anonymity around that or something like that. But those practical purposes of something that you feel like P&G had to make a change that they probably wouldn't have made without this, knowing full well that that's something we want to carry forward, right? Just like I mean, I know you did the virtual or the event, but like something maybe specific to your team or to the BRG that you think was a surprise.
I have a couple examples. One, our LGBTQ plus group in Latin America had actually just kicked off reapplying the lean-in circle concept from the women's group. And they had only had maybe one meeting prior, and then it had to go virtual. And what they've said is not only has their attendance gone up, but the types of topics that they've been able to cover virtually, it goes back to what I said earlier, because they're able to maybe have a speaker on a topic that they wouldn't have wanted to pay to fly in for, a 1 hour conversation, but now you can link into that speaker remotely for that 1 hour and not have all the travel costs. So they've been able to, and I would say when you do things virtually, you're able to pivot a little bit quicker. So if you have someone on the schedule to come in for an event and speak, you're locking that in months, if not a year in advance. If you need to get an hour on somebody's calendar to do a virtual event, you're able to get that, weeks or maybe a couple of months ahead of time. So that lean-in circle concept going virtual really helped. The other one we talked about was the intersectionality. So I mentioned we in North America, we have our LGBTQ meeting once per year in person. This year we made it virtual, but we also shortened it and really focused on the fact that there's a need right now in our community to recognize that Black Lives Matter. And so we're actually having one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter speak to us because she happens to be a queer woman of color. And so we're co-hosting the event with our African ancestry group. And that is something that we would never have been able to do that in an in-person event, because we would have had those speakers and the whole lineup locked months in advance. And we were able to, at the last minute, say, no, this is a more relevant, timely, I can't think of the right word, topic. And we've been able to really pivot and make it something that is addressing a current need in our society.
And was that just a reach out to, like, that was the practical steps of searching for the intersectionality, I think is so vital. Is that just the connection between the leaders of those BRG, ERGs making that connection? I think also one of the things is room capacity or location for the event, right? There's accessibility that comes with that to bump that Zoom meeting from 100 to 200 to get another, just make it almost an open call to the BRG, ERGs is something we've never been able to do before.
Yeah, and it allows you to extend that reach into people who, even when we were doing in-person events, weren't able to come, due to schedule reasons or cost reasons. So yeah, we've seen, and I know, again, we talked about this as a panel, every event that we've done virtually since COVID, the participation, now there was some debate in the chat about participation versus engagement. The participation has gone up significantly. Now, are they multitasking? Are they getting everything out of it that they would have if they had been physically in the room? Maybe not, but you're getting to hundreds of people instead of tens of people. So your net impact, if we had a way to measure that, would still be positive, in my opinion.
That's great. That's great. And I'll just ask Mark and Will, at your, whoever wants to jump in first, maybe just address one thing that you have found that either your specific ERG, BRG, or kind of that whole network is taking moving forward that you've seen as beneficial, just to call out, one opportunity that you want to take with you forward.
Hey, it's Will. I'll start off, Mark, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I'll tell you, for us, what's been really interesting is we've had fewer events. We've had about half the number of events our ERGs have had across the board than we normally have. But what's shocking is we've had 4 times as many participants in half the number of events. So a whole lot more people are attending fewer events. And we think that there's a couple of things. Folks are craving a connection right now and a desire. We've shifted the type of events that we're having to really try and listen to what people want. And then for the event organizers, we spent a lot of time up front, and we continue to do some reminders on how to use technology, tips, pointers, and tricks for actually driving engagement remote meetings. And so it's not just your typical Zoom, if you will, right? But instead, it's really a different type of approach. And what we found is people keep coming back for more, which is great. I'll stop there because I know we're up against the clock here.
Go ahead, Mark. And we will, I think we can go 10 minutes over. So Mark, you can do it. And then if
Well,
anybody
I'll try
wants
not to take 10 minutes over. How's that?
Oh, you're good. Pop questions in that Q&A and we'll just address it. And I know people have to leave and go. So thanks for coming, and we'll add all the files and the content to the chat afterwards. So go ahead.
Well, one of the things that we want to carry forward, I personally want to carry forward, is the feeling of an equal playing field. I saw that in the chat earlier. Zoom meetings like this take away the feeling of, well, he's a boss or she's 2 levels up and I have to sit and be quiet and listen to what they have to say. You get a feeling of equality. And if you're willing to put yourself out there, you get listened to more in this kind of environment than usually you do sitting in a room or a conference room somewhere, because people will give you the opportunity to speak. And so that is one of the key lessons I want us to carry forward, even when the new normal is normal and we're back into where more of us are working face-to-face or back in a work environment, is trying to break down those stereotypical barriers of levels and privilege that ties with the various jobs that you have, and be more equal, be more connected as human beings, and being willing to listen.
That's great. That's super helpful. And one thing that was brought up that I think we had discussed in one of our pre-event calls was sometimes it makes more sense to make the meeting invite list smaller, to make it more efficient. If somebody just needs to be there and we have no expectation, even if it was in person, for them to really be additive, we have the ability to record that conversation and then they can listen to it on their own time frame when they can be more engaged, as opposed to having the emails pop up. We've all had plenty of those that we sit in. So I think being mindful of who's actually in the meeting and who can gain just as much from listening to the recording, I think is again, and I think everybody brought this up in different ways, is we just have to think about how we do it differently, from something as simple as who's on the list and leveraging the technologies to be more efficient, to really, as a leader, making it a priority that, when somebody's eyes are going to their email or what they're clicking through or things like that. So how are we as leaders more mindful of that, of just changing it? So we've got, I don't see any questions that are coming, but keep shooting those in. And if I can just have each of you jump in with, just one takeaway of something you think that people could do, say they are an organizer or a participant in a virtual meeting next week. Hopefully everybody's blocked this week for Out and Equal, but as they re-engage and they take these resources with them, what is one way that they can either host a meeting or participate in a meeting differently to really increase the impact that they can have? And Mark,
starting with me, be vulnerable. Reach out and ask how people are doing at the beginning of a meeting before you get into the topic of what the meeting is all about. Just be present, be vulnerable, and be caring.
That's awesome. Kevin, how about you? What's one thing people can kind of take forward to
Ash, it's actually a little bit what you were saying. Some of it is back to basics. Like, I think we've all sort of lost how to set up, plan for, run, and recap a meeting. And I saw several people putting it in here, like the number of meetings that I get invited to that don't have an agenda, that don't have a purpose. I don't know why I'm on the invite. I don't know why half the people are on the invite. Like, just being clear, so that, because we're already all stressed out enough, the last thing we need is to have 10 meetings show up on our calendar that we don't even know. And then we show up and find out that we should have done some pre-work to be ready for it. Like, it sounds so simple, but you think about stress levels, and just running better meetings will reduce people's stress level.
Absolutely, that's great. And Will, give us one from you, and then we'll sign off.
Give people the forum they need to express themselves and share with you how they're doing. So when you're planning a meeting, ask folks what they want and give them what they tell you they need, as opposed to assuming you know what they want. And then at the top of all those meetings, integrate into all of your meeting routines, brownies and brownies, something to give folks that outlet and that place to be able to express themselves.
Great, and I think I would just add is to be really mindful of all of these stresses that do exist, right? Whether those are regionally, whether those are human experiences dependent on our diversity, whether those are individual things that are happening to us, to really be mindful of everything that's out there, to remember those people that we're not considering, those stresses that we're not considering, and to really use those as a teachable moment. So as a group, we can be more aware of the stresses that people are under, the empathy that we need to bring to the table, and the compassion to really be better leaders and give people, like all the panelists have said, what they need in this critical time, and know when that specific event, quote unquote, ends, it doesn't mean it's over for some of us. So how do we make sure that those are continuing conversations that we have? So thank you to my panelists, as always, and an honor to share a Zoom screen with any of you, and look forward to working again together in the future. And we will again post everything. There'll be a recording on this, so feel free to pass it on to your friends and colleagues to check out later, and we'll make sure we include the discussion. For a great summit. Thank you all. Bye.